All right, so let me share my screen here. We're going to go ahead and start with chapter 8. So let me go up over here so we can get started. Okay, all right, so let's go ahead and talk about chapter 8, which deals with the administrative state. Now, as I was explaining right now, we touched on the executive branch already in great detail when we were covering the governorship within chapter 7. So it makes sense that the next chapter that we would cover would be chapter 8, because now we're going to expand upon the rest of the executive branch when we look at the rest of the plural executive and what they do when it comes to some of these major positions that we talked about, right? Such as the we're going to talk about the attorney general. We're going to talk about the comptroller of public accounts. We're going to talk about commissioner general land office and all these other positions here, the agricultural commissioner. So we're going to talk about the rest of the plural executive and what they do, as well as some of these other boards and what they do as well, right? So let's take a look at this to begin with, right? So by the end of this chapter, you should be able to understand the complexity of the administrative organization in Texas, including the plural executive. And that's putting it lightly in terms of the complexity. I mean, of all the chapters that I teach in Texas government, I would probably say that this one is probably the most difficult because there's so many different moving parts in this chapter. Like I said, I was taking a little bit of extra time to go through my notes before we began here, because there's just so much information in there. For those of you all who have already kind of read through the chapter, you probably know what I'm talking about. There's a lot of this information. And while I don't want to say that it's difficult information, if you've never seen this information before, it is going to sound very foreign to you. It's going to be something that is not really going to be all that user friendly to understand, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And as someone who has studied this stuff for many years, I mean, it still is complicated even for me. So imagine how it would be like for like let's say someone who isn't studying government to kind of see this for the first time, and they're going to be like, wow, this doesn't make any sense at all. But again, we'll try our best to kind of explain it here, and hopefully you all be able to at least be able to get the gist of what we're talking about here. I'm not going to ask you all to like, okay, like tell me, what does this obscure board do? Like, this board on like hospitality compliance and and things like that. I mean, don't worry about that. I mean, it's not going to be that specific. I want for you all to have a general understanding of this. Trace the growth of government. We're going to take a look at some historical trends in terms of why is it that government is so much larger now than what it was, 200 years ago? Why do we have so much more government regulation? Why is there just so many more government employees and there's so much money being spent on government? We're going to talk about how, and this leads us a little bit to administrative management theory, both 8.2 and 8.3 here, where we're going to, because in public administration, you learn about this. If you take public administration classes, you learn about how government has grown and how government has become much more responsible for things, probably pretty much after the conclusion of World War II. And we'll talk about that here. Describe the characteristics of bureaucracy and bureaucratic survival techniques. So we're going to define what a bureaucracy is and how do they operate. As someone who has been a public servant pretty much their whole life, I mean, I could probably count in my hand how many jobs I've had in the private sector. I've pretty much have been a public sector, I guess you'd call me a bureaucrat, right? I've been a public sector employee almost my entire life. And of course I can explain why, because, I'm working in the public sector because I want that really good retirement. We public employees get what is called a pension. That's basically after you retire, you're able to get a set amount of income for the rest of your life. And of course, it's dependent on how many years you work, how much money you make, and then they put it into a formula, right? So I'm part of the TRS, the teacher retirement system in Texas. So depending on how much money I put in, how many years I make, you enter in a formula, and then that gets how much money you're going to get when you retire. So that's always been my main perk in terms of why I've worked in the public sector, because in the private sector, you don't get that. You have like those 401ks, and those are a lot more riskier because that's tied to the stock market. Whereas for the pensions, that's that's spelled out. You'll get that. So again, just want to give an example of why I've gravitated towards the public sector. I feel like it's more safe. Evaluate bureaucratic orientation, its effect on the public interest. So we're going to take a look at how bureaucracies not just operate, but also how they view the public. How do they make decisions based on the public's behalf? And sometimes do they make decisions not in the best interest of the public? We're going to take a look at that as well. Assess the bureaucracy's accountability to the governor, the legislature, and the public, right? So we're going to take a look at how, while, bureaucrats and members of the bureaucracy and, people who work within government, they are accountable to Texas government. They are accountable to the governor and the legislature. It's not so clear cut in terms of what those direct lines of responsibility are, right? As well as how does the public, what is the accountability for the public, right? You probably have heard that, some people will be very opinionated about this. They'll say things like, well, my tax dollars pay for your job, or things like that, and while technically that is correct, you also do have to understand that it's not so clear cut to just like kind of barge into someone's office and be like, well, I'm going to be here because I paid for this office. Like there's levels to this. There's levels to that accountability in terms of trying to get accountability in a professional manner, right? And I'm not trying to discount some people who do this. In fact, I watch some of these YouTube videos with, they call them like these First Amendment auditors, and I think it's interesting to kind of see that, right? Like how people just kind of like, they kind of tense up whenever they see them walking around like filming, things like that and all that. So I mean, I do get where they're coming from in terms of why they would feel like uncomfortable about that. And so, but it's interesting, right? It's interesting to see like how these bureaucrats and these public employees, how they interact with the public. They're obviously, of course, supposed to be respectful to the public and keep that in mind, right? As a longtime public servant, like I said, I've been working in the public sector for about 20 years already. No, not quite 20 years, more like 15. Sorry, yeah, about 15, give or take, maybe like 15 to 17, because there's been a couple of years where I've worked, but I didn't get enough for the retirement. So I've always maintained that I've tried to be as professional as possible. Same thing the way I treat you all, right? I mean, I look at you all as my constituents. You all are the reason why I have the job that I have. If people don't sign up for my class, then I can't teach this class, right? And that's less money that I'll be able to take home to be able to use on, my essentials, right? I try to be as frugal as possible with my money. That's not to say that I don't buy things that I like, but I always try to make sure that the money that I am earning, on the public dime, that it's used respectfully, right? That I use it to, pay my bills, help out with my family. I always do that first before I spend on anything else for me, because that money, even though I work for it, it does come from the public, and the public does have a right to, to ensure that I'm trying to do the best job possible. I mean, and of course within reason, right? I mean, it also wouldn't be like reasonable to, like, I guess, for people to expect for me to like be on call all the time. Like you're a public employee, I can access you whenever I want. Well, no, I still have a life, but within my working capacity, within those working hours, I try to do the best I can. And of course, I do a lot of work outside of working hours. Like you probably have seen that I'll answer emails like late at night, because I'm more of a night person anyway. So I'm usually always working on something. Again, I don't mean to like make this about myself. I just want to give, I guess I just want to, this chapter it kind of is very personal for me, because since I am a longtime public employee, I kind of like to give my thoughts on how I view the bureaucracy, and how, as a member of the bureaucracy for a long time, I kind of give my thoughts on all that. And so I just want to kind of just throw that in there really quick. So, okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the administrative state. So let's go ahead and define what a bureaucracy is. So a bureaucracy is defined as a type of organization that is characterized by hierarchy, specialization, fixed and official rules, and relative freedom from outside control. Now, let's kind of break this down a little bit in terms of what these components are, right? So a hierarchy, if any of y'all have ever like studied business or any type of field that deals with organizations, then you'll probably be familiar with what a hierarchy is, right? A hierarchy is basically where the people in an organization are put on a pyramid, so to speak, right? The reason why a pyramid is a great representation of it is because the higher up you go in an organization, the less people are going to be up, the higher up you go. It's kind of like a pyramid or a mountain, so to speak, right? Because the mountain gets narrower the higher up it goes, right? The base is always the largest, because it needs to support the rest of the mountain that goes up. So your entry level positions, your people, the everyday workers, they're going to be at the base, they're going to be at the bottom. And then as you move up, you're going to move up into like the supervisory roles, so like, with STC, And every department, of course, is going to be different. Like, or any other department, right? Any other entity is going to be where you're going to have your, the workers, whether it's like your hourly workers or your degreed workers or your more professionally skilled workers. Every department is still going to have people at the bottom who are actually working on the everyday tasks that the department is responsible for. And every department is going to be different in terms of its specialty and what it requires, right? So like like a case in my department, yes, I'm at the lower level, but because I'm highly skilled, because of my degrees and my experience, that's why I'm going to make more than maybe some entry level person in another department, like let's say like in the security department, right? So the security guards, and the police officers, probably not going to make as much money as the professors are, because the professors definitely do require more of that specialization. Although the police officers are going to make more than the security, because the police officers have to get like their TCO license or their certification. So because there's more credentials that are needed for those entry level positions, they're going to make more than maybe some of the, maybe like the security guard things. I hope I'm making this sound clear. But then as you move up, of course, then you have like your department chair, who's kind of like, who supervises the department. Then after that, then you have the dean, who supervises all of the different departments within that specific division. So, so if we're looking at like, and this is the way it's done in like colleges and universities, you'll have like vice presidents for academic affairs. You'll have vice presidents for like the maintenance and business operations. You'll have vice presidents when it comes to like student services and things like that, because there's a lot of roles that are in a college, right? So if we're looking at the academic affairs, which is where the professors are located, moving up from the department chair, then we have the dean of the specific disciplines, like the dean of like social sciences, the dean of liberal arts, and all that. And then you also have like other deans, like the deans for like science and math and all that. And then moving up there, then you have the VP for academic affairs, who oversees all of the different academic divisions. And then moving up to there, then you have the president of the college. So I just want to give you an example of hierarchy, right? So, and again, as I mentioned, the higher up you go, there's not going to be as many people at the top, right? There's only going to be one president. There will be several vice presidents, and then there'll also be several deans and directors, across the different divisions. But again, as you go up, the very top, then you're going to have just one person here, right? And also keep in mind that that in colleges they do have they do have school boards, just like for K through 12, they also have school boards here. But again, so that's kind of like what hierarchy is. Specialization, we kind of talked about this a little bit, right? Specialization, of course, is where people that are going to be hired within a bureaucracy, they have to have some sort of skill set, right? They have to be able to be qualified to perform a certain task, a certain role, right? So, again, using me as an example, right? So my specialization is teaching political science. Now, I'm rather unique, although there are a few other professors that are like this, where I could also specialize in other areas. I can teach history, I can teach criminal justice, I can teach sociology. Now, I wish that colleges would probably be like, and some of them are like, where like, especially like in smaller colleges, like I know like in some of the other colleges I've worked at, they'll have me teach history and government, because in some colleges, especially like the smaller colleges, they'll combine history and government together into one discipline. But SEC is a little bit different, because history is in another division. It's not part of social behavior. So it usually just does depend on the bureaucracy and how it's constructed. The reason why I say that is because it would be nice if, like, let's say, hey, we need another person to teach history. Let's get, Mr. Gonzalez, he can teach history. Or we need another person for sociology. Let's get him to teach a sociology class. But they don't do that where I'm at. It would be nice, because it would be nice to be able to be, to have that versatility. But I know that some other places that they do that more. But I just want to give you like an example of specialization, how I can also do other specializations. Fixed and official rules, of course, that bureaucracy, of course, is they have, of course, policy manuals. And for those of you who work, you probably know about this, right? That when you go to work, you have certain rules you have to follow, certain policies that the organization is going to maintain. And also, of course, within those policy manuals, like I know, like for us, we have a faculty handbook and an employee handbook, because we're both I'm both an employee of SC and a faculty member. And so we have to adhere to those rules and regulations. We have to know the handbook and adhere to those requirements. And there's all kinds of rules that we have, like in these handbooks, like when it comes to like faculty certification, in terms of who's eligible to teach college classes. There's also policy when it comes to like, sick leave. There's policy when it comes to, um, like actually getting hired. It talks about, the process, like the human resources process. So there's all kinds of different policies, not just rules, but also policies that the college have to adhere to. And relative freedom from outside control, right? So this is where, you know, this has never happened to me before. I've never had a situation where like someone from the community just shows up to my office and they want to talk to me about how I'm doing my job. Like I've never been audited, kind of like what you see like on the YouTube videos. I mean, I don't even have students go to my office hours, so let alone the general public, someone coming by and wanting to talk to me, but it's so so we don't really have too much of that influence from the outside. It's mostly just, and that's usually because people are just so busy that they don't have time to go. And I certainly don't have time to go like to like the courthouse and go like see like how the clerks are doing, even though I used to do that a long time ago. But I don't have time for that. I don't have time. I barely have enough time to do my own work. So I think that could be a reason why people don't really do that, or maybe they might not even know where to go. Maybe they might not even feel like they are emboldened enough to do those things. So, but yes, for the most part, the public is. I don't really. I don't really talk to the public. I know as a public school teacher, I used to do that a lot more when it came to parents and speaking to them. Although you could make an argument that yes, they're the public, but they do have a stake in this because they're the parents of the student that you have in class, right? You're probably not going to have random parents, calling you unless it's their own, student. So you do have business with them. But anyway, let's break this down even further, right? So responsible for enforcing public policy and translating policy into action. This is the main responsibility of what the bureaucracy is supposed to do. And we talked about what public policy is before when we went over the legislative chapter, right? Public policy it's kind of like we talked about how like a law is like considered like a chapter of a book. Public policy is an entire book where you have laws that build on each other, laws, policies, regulations that build on each other to create I guess you could say like a story, so to speak, right? In terms of goals that political parties want to push forth, right? Woven into this narrative of like of course if we look at like Republicans, they tend to favor lower taxes and maybe more regulation when it comes to social issues, right? So if you've got laws that deal with like abortion or LGBTQ issues, the same thing with like not having a state income tax. So you see how that builds on the general policy that that these political parties are wanting to to pursue, and they have every right to do so because they've been winning these elections, right? So they feel emboldened to do that because they feel, well, the public voted for us, so we should, we're going to be able to push forth these policies. So, and again, and translating those policies into action, right? So, so agencies, state agencies, they're supposed to be looking at the laws that are passed by the legislature, and then they're supposed to interpret might not be the right word, but they have to try to look at the laws and then have it trickle down to the actual policies that are going to be crafted at the state agency level, right? Because laws might not be that specific in terms of in terms of how they get implemented, or even what do you do like if let's say a law gets violated, like if let's say I know. Let me use a quick example that I've been seeing, since this legislature adjourned, at least in the regular session. So one of the laws that was passed by the legislature is called the Crown Act. I don't know if you all heard of the Crown Act. This has been a movement. It didn't start in Texas. This has been a movement across the country, with other states have also passed their versions of the Crown Act. But basically, it had to do with not discriminating against someone's hairstyle. Now, as a male who has long hair, obviously, of course, I took a very keen interest in this because I have been discriminated against at certain places, because I'm a male that has long hair. Now, unfortunately, I've heard that there have been a couple of cases in this starting school year where some school districts have still been instituting these types of policies, which technically would be in violation of the Crown Act. So what I've been trying to find out is okay, so if there's a violation, what is the recourse? Who do you contact? And I can't find anything. I cannot find anything. So there's a law in the books, but it doesn't say what do you do when this law is violated, or when you have reason to believe that this law is violated. So because of that, sometimes there's a little bit of a gap in terms of, that's where these agencies might come in. And in a lot of cases, they do come in and they'll put forth the actions, in regards to this law, right? So that's an example of one that I'm trying to figure out, okay, so what do we do, right? So if someone wants to file a complaint, what do they do? Do they have to call their state rep? I mean, that's what I was thinking that, if I was going to be doing that, that's probably something that I would probably do is like, okay, let me call my state rep and see, they could give me some advice on this. That's called casework, like we talked about before. Anyway, so headed by the chief executive, right? So like I said, every agency, every institution, every entity is going to have a chief executive. So like like in the case of colleges, that's the college president. Um, and we'll also talk about how like I said, the community colleges also have school boards, just like school districts. Permeates the entire governmental structure, right? So pretty much every government entity nowadays follows this type of model, right? Where you have your everyday skilled workers towards the bottom, and then you move up with the supervisors and ultimately the heads of these agencies towards the top, right? Now also keep in mind that, and this is just kind of a little bit of an aside, something that I've noticed over the years, that just like as you go up higher with a mountain, it's easier, it gets harder to climb up and it's easier to fall off. Kind of the same thing with these entities, right? That's why I don't know if you've noticed, like, usually schools will change out their principals pretty often, but the teachers don't usually all get changed out. Or an example would be like for sports, like the head coach always gets, the blame, right? The players don't usually get changed out as often as the head coach does, right? The higher up you go, the easier it is to fall off because you've got all that responsibility. And if you don't produce, then they're going to put someone else in there, which is not entirely fair because, you know, there are things beyond the chief executive's control, but at the same time, they do get a lot of, they do make pretty good money and they do get a lot of responsibility, so it comes with the territory, right? And then of course potential issues for democratic legitimacy, right? Because we talked a little bit about how that because bureaucrats are relatively free from outside public control, that creates a situation where maybe the public might not necessarily be all that enthusiastic or even in agreement with having tax dollars go to entities and organizations that the public might not feel, the public might not agree with the job that's being done. Like, and I know that colleges and universities usually get a lot of the brunt of this because unfortunately colleges and universities don't necessarily, and especially in nowadays, they might not necessarily have a like a high enough graduation rate for the public to feel that that investment that they're making is actually worth it. What I mean by this is that, so I'll give you an example. So we'll talk about property taxes later on. So when we pay our property taxes at the end of January, which again, I'm not a fan of that, you're also going to get to see all of the different taxing agencies, in terms of where that money comes from, right? So so there's a variety of ones, right? So the school district is usually the biggest one. Of course, you also have some of these regional school districts like South Texas ISD, as well as the colleges, right? So like STC, that's an example of, where the college is going to, request, that property tax money to fund the college, right? A portion of the property tax bill that you pay goes to my salary. Now, that's why I try to do my best to keep that in mind, because I know people don't like paying these property taxes, especially with how much they've gone up in the last several years. So that's why I try to do as best as I can to, to not make it look like I'm being ungrateful for the sacrifice that the public is making, right? But at the same time, if the public doesn't feel like, let's say the colleges aren't graduating enough students, then that could be a cause for concern where the public can be like, hey, like I paid all this money in property tax and I'm not even getting a return. Like society is not getting a good return on their investment if we don't have enough students graduating. So keep that in mind as to why colleges definitely try to, they want to try to get for you all to graduate. And that's why they're constantly calling you and emailing you and, keeping tabs to make sure that you do graduate and all that, because they do get evaluated on that. Okay, let's go ahead and continue here really quickly. So I know I've been kind of just going on and on about this one here, but as you notice, I can definitely talk a lot about this. So, okay, let's take a look at the state administrative agencies and let's take a look at the essential characteristics here. So I know we're kind of, we got about so we'll try to do as much as we can. Okay, so essential characteristics that cause confusion. So these are some of the, I guess you could say, maybe not necessarily criticisms of the way the state bureaucracies are set up, but these are definitely, I guess you could say, causes for concern, I guess you could say, or ways in which people are not really too enthused about the way the state government is administered. So let me just take a swig of water and then we'll continue. And we're going to explain right now why this happens. So first one, there's no uniform organization pattern. Now, one of the main reasons for this is because in a textbook theoretical in a textbook theoretical bureaucracy, trying saying that 5 times really fast. That's why I had to slow down and say it. It's a lot more straightforward, right? It goes back to what I was saying, right? Where you have a boss at the top, you have other bosses, below him, and then you have the workers, right? And it's a top-down approach, right? We're going to talk about Max Weber, the pretty much regarded as the father of modern sociology, but he was also very much involved in public administration. That's why I've learned about him in both my sociology classes and my public administration classes, because of how brilliant he was. We're going to talk about him a little bit later in terms of his theories here when it comes to bureaucracies and administration. But again, so going back to this, so there is no uniform organization pattern because in a lot of these agencies, they don't just have one head of the agency. Some of these agencies can also be headed by boards. And so in some of the and what that causes, excuse me, is that causes for there to be like multiple bosses, like you have multiple people that you have to send reports to. Again, I can also say that this also happens to me at work as well, because even though I have one direct supervisor that I answer to, which is the chair, that doesn't mean that I can just ignore emails from like the registrar or emails from these other these other departments that like one of the major administrative responsibilities that we have to do as professors is we have to submit roster verifications, right? We have to submit those reports to the registrar's office so that they can send that information over to the state and the federal government to ensure that the students are actually attending class. Especially if you're getting financial aid, you have to be attending your classes, right? So the college has to send that information over to the federal government to verify that students are actually attending class. So I can't just ignore those, right? I can't just be like, well, you're not my direct supervisor, so what does it matter to I'm just going to ignore this email. No, I cannot ignore it because, well, for one, if I do, they're going to call my direct supervisor, and then they're going to and then and then of course, and that's not ever good because the direct my chair is going to be like, well, why didn't you respond to them? I can't just be like, well, they're not my boss. Well, yes, but that's a responsibility you have, right? So do you all see how it's already kind of confusing, right? Because I have to answer to a variety of different people. So the state agencies are no different, right? You've got, yes, you might have your direct supervisor, but then you also have like maybe the supervisor above them, and then also these boards where they kind of share, they share responsibilities. And every agency is different, right? Some of them are more straightforward where it's just one person at the top, but then some of them also have these boards here, right? Texas administration has numerous exceptions, right? Where and the book talks about how these exceptions are like, let's say, some of these boards might have jurisdiction over some areas within the agencies, but they don't have complete jurisdiction. Maybe they share it with, again, there's another example of federalism, right? To try to share that power amongst different supervisors, right? So, and again, it does create a very complex situation where you're not sure who you answer to. Now, I will say personally, I do. Let me share just a personal note here. Now, personally, as someone who's been working in the public sector for 15 years, there is a benefit to that because if you've got like multiple people that you answer to, then it's going to be hard for them to let you go because that decision is not just going to be left up to one person, right? You kind of get what I'm saying? Is that because you're having to work for a variety of different people, then it's going to be hard to like, try to, I guess, kind of get rid of someone because it's like, well, I mean, I'm fine with this person, but why is this person having a problem? So it does kind of create a situation where you're kind of, your job maybe is a little bit more secure because you've got multiple people that you're answering to. And then some state agencies have great power while others are limited, and the number of agencies is impossible to accurately define, right? So yeah, do keep that in mind that not every state agency, of course, is looked at the same in terms of how the governor views these agencies. Does the governor have their favorites, in terms of different agencies? I mean, maybe that might not be the best way to put it, but look at the money that's being spent for some agencies as opposed to others, right? So we can obviously see that, like a good example would be like, DPS definitely gets a lot more money than some of these other state agencies. So, I mean, and again, and it's not necessarily that it's more about favoritism, but it's more so that the governor is going to make a more concerted effort to make this a higher priority on his list, right? So when it comes to border security and criminal justice and things like that, obviously, of course, that is a major policy initiative that Governor Abbott and the Republicans are advocating for. So it makes sense that they would definitely want to have more money for it, things like that, And sometimes that is at the expense of other agencies, where maybe money that was previously allocated for one agency goes to another one because there's new priorities, which again, it makes sense, because things change, when it comes to government responsibilities, and sometimes emergencies come up and you have to do what you have to do. But yes, and with that being said, that's why, of course, it's impossible to to accurately define in terms of the number of agencies, because some of these agencies overlap with each other, and there's just all kinds of different responsibilities, right? That's why it's very, very difficult to. That's why the book doesn't really go that much into detail in terms of defining which of these agencies are, kind of at risk. And you would have to be like an Austin insider in terms of actually living there and working with the agencies and talking with them to be able to get a really good understanding. Not to say that the book doesn't do a good job, but if you really wanted to know this, you would have to actually go and do some research on this, and it would definitely take a long time because of how big Texas is when it comes to this responsibility. Okay, let's take a look at the types of policymakers and state agencies. All right, so the elected executives. Okay, we've definitely talked about them at great length. This is your governor, your lieutenant governor, and we'll talk about the rest of them, right? Like the comptroller of public accounts, the attorney general. The appointed executives. So there are a few appointed executives, such as like the Texas Secretary of State. We're going to talk about them later on. There's elected commissions and elected boards. Now we have state level elected commissions and boards, such as the Texas Railroad Commission and the Texas State Board of Education. But you also have more local elected, commissions and boards, right? Again, like your school boards, as well as your college district boards as well. Here, like SDC has theirs. We also have the ex officio boards and commissions. We also talked about them in the previous chapters, right? These are the people who serve on boards because of their current position, right? So this is where we like the legislative budget board, right? I can't go serve on that board because I am not a high-ranking Texas official, right? It's kind of like you can also make it as kind of like a committee, right? Like, so I'm a member of currently I'm a member of the curriculum committee, within our division at STC. So, that's an example of an ex officio board because of my role as a professor, right? So not anyone outside of the college can serve on that board. And it has to be also very specific, right? It has to be specific to, it has to be, it's only open to the faculty, right? Like the secretaries wouldn't be able to serve on that board because their job is not, that's not part of their job, right? But because I'm in academia, and my job is related to academia, because not everyone who works at a college, what I'm trying to say is that not everyone that works in a college has their job directly related to academia. So when I was a security guard, or I'm sorry, when I was a security supervisor, yes, I was working at a college, but my everyday job was not related to, to reading and books and academia, right? But because now my job is related to that, I can serve on that curriculum committee as, so that's another example of an ex officio board. And then appointed boards and commissions. Now, this is where, this of course is, and Texas does have a lot of these boards, and we'll talk about some of them, like the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. We talked about them, which basically is the board that oversees the colleges and universities in Texas. So we'll talk about them here in a little bit. Okay. So like I said, so this is a listing here. We're going to go over all these here. We'll try to go through them as quickly as possible here. So let's take a look at, let me just take another swig of water because this is going to take a while. So let's kind of go through this. And then I think this will kind of be towards, this will be the last things we'll talk about, and then we'll get to big government. So let's take a, these will be the last one we'll take a look at for today here. Let me just kind of, let me just kind of run through this a little bit here, just to make sure that I am on the right spot here. If you want to make sure that I definitely do say this correctly here, make sure decision. Okay. Okay. See, okay. Let's go ahead and get started here. Okay, so let's talk about the agencies with elected executives. Now, we're going to get into the plural executive again. Right now, we've talked about the plural executive at great length here in this class. This is definitely why when I interviewed a couple of years ago for to be as an adjunct to teach government, this was the question they asked me. They asked me about the plural executive. There's a reason why they asked me that as that question, right? Because this may be the most unique aspect of Texas government. So it makes sense as to why they asked me that question, which thankfully, if I was fresh out of college, I have no idea. But thankfully, because I have this experience, I was able to do well, and I was able to get that adjunct position. So I'm very proud of that. But anyway, so I'm sorry that guys, I know I do too much self-serving. I'm sorry, I apologize for that. It's just that sometimes I'm kind of proud of like how far I've come. 10 years ago, like I couldn't get hired anywhere, and now like it's like so like now I have to like turn down opportunities. It's just interesting just how much has changed in the last 10 years. Okay, anyway, but with that being said, let's go and continue. So let's take a look at the agencies with elected executives. So these are partisan ballots for 4-year terms. So what that means here, of course, is that these are the people who run, as part of political parties, and they run on these ballots, to be elected, right? In these state elections, right? And they're elected for 4-year terms. So there's 5 elected executives in 2018. All 5 of them are Republican. Most of them are incumbents, except for the commissioner of the General Land Office. Now, the book is a little bit outdated already, because in this last election that we had last year in 2022, the former commissioner of the General Land Office, his name is George P. Bush. He's actually the nephew of George W. Bush, and he's the son of Jeb Bush, the former, W's brother and the former governor of Florida. That's his son. So he was the commissioner of the General Land Office, but he ran for attorney general against Ken Paxton, but he lost in the primary. So the way that works is, and that's why this was very risky for him, because he couldn't run for both of them at the same time. You have to make a choice, right? So if you want to try to move up, then if you're already in one of these positions, then you do risk losing your previous position, right? It's not like where, like, let's say if you're looking for another job and you keep your current job until you find a new one. Imagine if you had to quit your job and then go find a new one. Then that's more risky, right? That's kind of like for elections, you can't run for your previous position if you want to move up for something else, right? So, but we'll break that down right now. So again, these are the 5 elected executives. They are all Republicans still, but some of them are a little bit different. Now there are agencies with, or let's see, I think it does ask me. Okay, so let's kind of go over each of them here, because it does. I thought it was going to ask me to. I thought it was going to explain, but I'll go over them. Okay, so of course we talked about the lieutenant governor, right? We talked about how the lieutenant governor in the legislative chapter is basically the de facto leader of the Texas Senate. So we talked about how the lieutenant governor is interesting because, yes, they are technically an executive position, but they actually are more of a legislator, right? They're like an executive legislator, I guess you could say. Again, another example of federalism, kind of combining two of these branches of government into one position, and having someone from the executive have direct control over the legislature. So it's definitely very interesting. Attorney General. Okay, let's talk about the Attorney General's role. Mr. Ken Paxton, right? So, and then of course, this book is also updated because we just had his impeachment proceeding, right? And of course, he was acquitted on that. But let's talk a little bit about what he does. Now, most people like to think of the Attorney General as kind of like the top attorney, the top law enforcement agent. And while technically that is true, most of the work that the Attorney General does is mostly on the civil side. The Attorney General is the person that is going to represent Texas whenever Texas is involved, or any state agency, right? Whether it's the state of Texas or any state agency involving, Texas government. The Attorney General is going to be the top lead attorney that is going to represent Texas. Another example is when Texas gets sued by the federal government, which, like I've said before, it happens more often than not. It happened with the current situation there in Eagle Pass with the buoy there in the Rio Grande. So the federal government stepped in and filed a lawsuit with that. So the Attorney General is responsible for, for representing Texas and defending Texas whenever there's a lawsuit, right? Now, the Attorney General also has other responsibilities. Some of these responsibilities, of course, this goes to the Office of the Attorney General, and those responsibilities deal, again, with consumer protection. They also deal with antitrust litigation. workers' comp insurance, organized crime, as well as environmental protection. So they do a lot of legal work when it comes to protections for, whether it's for corporations or also protections for people, right? Also protections for the state of Texas and their interests, right? So another aspect that the Office of Attorney General also handles is, and I know this because there's always job postings for this, is they also are responsible for the collection of the child support payments. There's tons of jobs there at the Attorney General, and I know this because when I was fresh out of college, I was trying to get into the public sector as quickly as I could, and I saw some of these positions right for the Attorney General's office where you are basically like calling these people to try to get them to pay their child support payments or things like that, right? So that's another role the Attorney General handles. The Attorney General also handles what are called advisory opinions, where the Attorney General can get involved in the legislative process by basically, let's say, there's a bill that's working its way through the, whether it's through the House or the Senate, and the Attorney General wants to look at that bill and ultimately determine, or in most cases, they usually go to the Attorney General, right? They'll ask the Attorney General, hey, like, what do you think about this bill? Is it in line with the Texas Constitution? Are there some aspects that are constitutional, some of them are not? Should we tweak this a little bit? And the Attorney General will give what's called an advisory opinion. Now, the book talks about how the advisory opinion is not legally binding, but because, and it's not legally binding, it's not like, it actually carries the weight of case law. However, though, if the Attorney General is saying this is not constitutional, don't even bother with it, then most people are not going to press forward with it, because then it's going to go to the Texas, Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is, most likely going to agree with what the Attorney General is saying. So it's just going to create more legwork, right? Like unnecessary legwork, right? So getting it, straight from the horse's mouth, I guess you could say, right? That idiom that if you hear it from them, then it's something to where, why bother, right? Why continue with the process if we already know that the Attorney General has made a ruling that it's probably not constitutional? So that's an effective way to try to sift out legislation, because if it's unconstitutional, then why bother, moving it forward, right? So again, and of course, like I said, the book is outdated. It does talk about some of Ken Paxton's, legal issues, and I know in the next edition it's definitely going to talk about the impeachment. So I'm in the process of adding some more of that information to the general resources. So, but it is very interesting in terms of how that impeachment trial went here. Let's move over to the comptroller really quickly. So the comptroller of public accounts, Mr. Glenn Hagar here. He is basically I've said before that he is basically in charge of the money, right? Now, of course, it's more nuanced than that, but pretty much in a nutshell, the comptroller, they're responsible for the administration of the state tax system, as well as performing audits of state agencies, the pre-audits, right? Even before the state agencies get their money, they have to check in with the comptroller to make sure that the budget requests that the state agencies are sending over, to the governor's office, the comptroller has to inspect those to make sure that the state has enough money. Because again, basically, the comptroller is the state's, in charge of the money, right? They're basically the state's banker. Because also keep in mind that unlike the federal government, where they can run under a deficit, the states cannot. Because the states can't coin their own money, the states are limited in terms of what they can spend, right? That's what's called, they have to, that's called the balanced budget, right? Where Texas has to make sure that every dollar that is allocated for spending, well, that's what I'm saying, right? They have to allocate for every dollar that's spent, right? It has to be accounted for. You can't just be spending all this and not have the money, right? Unlike the federal government, which can do that. And of course, some people have strong opinions about that. But yes, so the comptroller, of course, is responsible for that. The book does talk about how the comptroller used to be a lot more involved in the preparation of the budget, but now the Legislative Budget Board has kind of taken more of that active role, and instead, the comptroller is basically kind of looked at as like the accountant, basically, right? Like, okay, like we want to do this. Do we have enough money? And then they'll ask the comptroller, yeah, we got enough money. Whereas before, the comptroller used to have more of an active role in actually actually having more input in terms of how the money's being spent. Now the comptroller is mostly just kind of like, well, here's the money and you all do what you want. As long as, of course, you don't go over what we have. Okay, Commissioner of the General Land Office. Like I said, this used to be George P. Bush, but now it's headed by let's see, it's Dawn Buckingham. So she is the new Commissioner General Land Office. Basically, what the Commissioner of the General Land Office does is, because when Texas was admitted to the Union, Texas and Alaska are pretty much the only states that had their own land, right? Because Texas is so large, Texas was basically, pretty much, the way it works in other states is that the federal government owns land, but Texas and Alaska are the only two states where the state owns that land. So there's a lot of land that the state owns, and so that's why they are one of only two states that has a land office commissioner, right? And so the Commissioner General Land Office, what their main responsibility is to supervise all of the state-owned land, and most of that supervision falls under the responsibility of what to do with all the oil that Texas has, right? Because as you all know, Texas has a ton of oil. Not just not just with Spindletop, back at the turn of the 20th century, but even since then, we still have tons of oil in Texas. That's why two of the most lucrative oil and gas companies, Exxon and Valero, are headquartered in Texas, Houston and San Antonio, respectively, right? So the Commissioner General Land Office is a very important role, right? Mostly for that, to supervise the leasing of Texas land for oil and gas extraction. They're also, of course, responsible for other responsibilities such as environmental protection. So environmental protection is something that is handled by a variety of these different executives, right? But because they deal with land, it makes sense that they would also get involved when it comes to the environmental protection of lands. And we'll talk about we'll talk later on about the Parks and Wildlife Commission. They also have more of an active role in terms of the state parks and things like that. Now let's get to the Agriculture Commission. Now, again, a little bit of an overlap here. So the Texas Agriculture Commissioner, what they're responsible for is regulating and overseeing the ranch land of Texas, right? Texas definitely. The book talks about how that there's only 1% of the population in Texas that's still engaged in agriculture, talking about your farmers, which do keep in mind that that's one of the amendments to the Texas Constitutional Amendment. Oh, that's right. I also forgot to mention that now we have early voting starting. So this video was made. Oh, well, let's see. Is it okay if we kind of go over a couple minutes here? Let's just kind of finish this and then this next one, and then we'll end for today. Because I do want to try to get through this section here by today. So if it's okay, let's kind of just stick around a couple of more minutes here. But I did also want to mention that this video, of course, dated end of October 2023, that we do have the I'll mention that at the end of class, because I do want to use this video like for future semesters. So that's fine. We'll talk about that here. But again, the Commissioner of Agriculture, what they're responsible for is, again, they're responsible for overseeing the regulation of this ranch land, right? The farmers, and as I mentioned before, farming can be very lucrative in Texas, right? So even though only 1% of them are involved in farming and ranching, there's still a lot of ranch country out there, right? There's tons of it, right, in Texas. Texas still is a leading producer of beef exports when it comes to raising cattle, for the consumption of beef, and so Texas definitely still is definitely one of the top places when it comes to agriculture, as well as as well as not just for cattle and livestock, but also for the growing of crops, right? I mean, we still have a lot of cotton production in Texas, as well as all kinds of crops, such as sorghum and all kinds, even there's also sugarcane, down here here in the valley, between where is it? It's between La Villa and Santa Rosa, right? So if you're listening to this video and you're not from here, don't worry about that. But I would just want to give some local examples of the types of agriculture and ranching that we have here in Texas. I'm sure that there's also all kinds of other ones, right? Like I know, going up north, we've got the strawberries over there, like in Poteet, and all kinds of other farming and things like that. Corn is also a big one as well. So with that being said, with all of those different crops that are being harvested and the livestock, we obviously, of course, that falls under the Commissioner of the Agriculture, and they, of course, are responsible, like I said, for not just regulating, the activities there within the farms and ranch lands, but they're also involved in regulation of pesticides too. Oh, I also forgot to mention that poultry is also another big industry in Texas. Not just when it comes to harvesting of eggs, but also with poultry consumption, right? So that's also another big industry in Texas. More so towards more sort of towards like East and Northeast Texas, but again, that's also another big industry. I know like in Waco, they had one of these big plants, when it came to poultry, right? So they are, so the Commissioner of Agriculture is responsible for overseeing all of those agencies, regulating them, and also, of course, regulating pesticides, and trying to ensure that the pesticides that are used, like if you got like those planes that are flying low to spray the pesticides. Actually, I saw that earlier this summer when I was in the Panhandle. I was actually able to see some of those, crop dusters, and the planes, spraying the pesticides, right? So the Commissioner, the Agriculture Commissioner, Mr. Sid Miller, is responsible for a variety of these different responsibility, right? As well as also, looking for markets to export these Texas, like the Texas livestock and Texas poultry goods. So that's another example of, trying to market Texas, to send off these, these products that are being made here in Texas and harvested here. Okay, so those are the elected executives. Now let's take a look at the appointed executives. Right now, I mentioned the Secretary of State office is an appointed position, right? Ruth Hughes used to be the former Secretary of State, but now we have Jane Nelson. So she is now the new Secretary of State, and she is responsible for, and there's a variety of different responsibilities. Now, usually the one that gets the most attention is certifying elections. So the Secretary of State in Texas, that is their main responsibility. They are basically the top election official in Texas. They certify the elections. They get all the election data that comes from the different counties, because again, as I mentioned before, or no, we haven't gotten to the election chapter yet, but every county in Texas has their own elections department that's responsible for overseeing the elections in their county, right? And that of course includes all the elections, even federal elections, right? So that's why we'll talk later on when we get to the election chapter, how that because of the fragmented way that elections are run in the United States, it's basically like the presidential election is basically like 3,000 individual elections, because there's 3,000 counties in the United States, or over 3,000 counties. So it's basically like 3,000 separate elections, right? Even though the president is on the ballot in all 3,000 of those, but because every state is different in terms of how they tabulate the numbers, the timing of when the numbers come in, because even the counties are different, because counties use different ballot. They use different ballots. Like some of the more well-to-do counties, like Hidalgo County, they'll use the touch screen ballots, but then like Starr County, which is next to us, they're still using paper ballots because they don't have as much money coming in. So that takes a lot of time to go through all those different ballots and things like that. So the Secretary of State is responsible for getting all that information, because on election night, the counties will get the data, and then they'll send it over to the Secretary of State's office so they can, tabulate it and then certify the elections to, make sure that, to officially say that, yes, these are the election results. Maintaining records on campaign expenditures, right? So we'll talk about this when we get to the campaigns chapter, how that, political candidates have certain requirements where they have to note, like especially like if donations are over a certain amount, they have to record those donations. I believe it's over $50. They have to record those donations. In terms of putting it on a spreadsheet, filling out, these campaign finance reports, and those have to be sent over to the Secretary of State's office to ensure that, that you are, that not violating campaign finance laws, which we'll talk about that a little bit later. Keeping the list of lobbyists who register with the state. We'll talk about this when we get to the interest group chapter in terms of how people who want to lobby the state of Texas, when it comes to certain issues or certain nonprofit organizations, that they work for, they have to register with the state, and they have to disclose that they are lobbyists, right? And we'll talk more about what lobbying is and how that's a right of people to have it in the First Amendment of the Constitution. Administering the Uniform Commercial Code and issuing corporate charters. So this is also important, right? Because the Uniform Commercial Code is basically that's the laws put into place that regulate businesses and what businesses can and cannot do, and how to start your own business, right? So if you want to start a business, you have to send over that application to the Texas Secretary of State's office, and then they, if you meet the requirements, then they'll approve your charter. And then publishing the Texas Register. The Texas Register, this is the official record of administrative decisions, rules, regulations. Basically, they're basically the top record keeper when it comes to, Texas, decisions made by Texas at the state level here, right? So, okay, so let's kind of go through this really quickly because I do want to finish this. Okay, last one we'll take a look at here, and then we'll stop here for today. Okay, let's go to the elected boards and commissions. So again, there's two of them here. We're going to talk about we're going to talk about the statewide one, which is the Texas Railroad Commission, and then the district one here, which is the State Board of Education. So the Texas Railroad Commission is one of the most influential agencies in the state. Now, I mentioned before how, some people find it weird that the oil and gas industry is regulated by the Texas Railroad Commission. Like, what gives here, right? And I think I mentioned this before, right, in chapter 1, that the reason for this is because when the Texas Railroad Commission was started, the railroads were the main industry that required regulation in the state. Now, the Texas Railroad Commission still regulates the railroads, but instead of just creating a new commission, they just said, all right, we're just going to keep the same name, but now we're going to expand in terms of the regulation, right? So now the Texas Railroad Commission, like I mentioned, they are responsible for regulating all mining and extractive industries, again, such as oil and gas. Not only still responsible for overseeing the railroads in Texas, but also responsible for overseeing transportation in Texas, right? Such as buses and moving vans, especially 18-wheeler trucks. This is a big industry in Texas, right? Because of NAFTA and the ability for these trucks to go into Mexico and then bring their raw materials to be assembled at the maquiladoras over in Monterrey, and then drive them back up I-35 through Laredo, and then go into San Antonio, and then from there going all across the country, right? So because so much industry comes through Texas and out of Texas, I mean, you see it, right? You see there's 18-wheelers every day when we're driving, right? They're all over the place. So especially in Laredo. If any of y'all have ever gone to Laredo and seen the international bridge that connects to 35, it is a sight to behold. There are miles and miles of 18-wheelers just going back and forth on both sides of Laredo. So because that's the strategic point for a lot of these trucks to go to, right? Because from Laredo, you catch I-35, that takes you to San Antonio, and then from there you can go everywhere. You can keep going on 35 to go towards Dallas. You can go to I-10 east to head to Houston and points eastward towards the rest of the country, New Orleans or other places, then moving on I-10 and other places towards that. Or you can go on I-10 west, which takes you to El Paso, and then that takes you all the way to like LA, Denver, moving up the West Coast, right? And all of the points in between. Or if you want to go to the north, right, then you go on 35, and that takes you north to like through Oklahoma. And so again, I don't mind to give you all a geography lesson. It's just that you can tell I really love geography. But you see, that's why all of that industry has to go through Texas first. So when I say that the Texas Railroad Commission is a very powerful board, and it's a very powerful committee. I guess you follow board too, right? It's a very powerful commission, and it oversees a bunch of money, a bunch of industry. You can see why it's very important, right? And we have statewide elections for staggered 6-year terms. So every 2 years, you're going to have one of these members up for the Texas Railroad Commission, because there's 3 of them, and then they serve those staggered 6-year terms, right? And then it starts over again after the because then it's, like I said, let me explain it again, right? So it's staggered terms every 2 years. So 2 years, there's going to be one position open for the Texas Railroad Commission. Then 2 years later, there's going to be the second position, and then 2 years after that, which is 6 years, then we get the third one, and then it repeats the cycle, right? So that's why they're staggered. So there's only one of these Railroad Commission positions open every 2 years. Let's get to the State Board of Education. Now, keep in mind that the Texas Railroad Commission is a statewide election. It's a statewide board, so everyone that votes in these elections can vote for members of the Texas Railroad Commission. Not so for the State Board. The State Board is not a statewide election. With the State Board of Education, this is based off of districts. I would show you the map, but we're already running out of time here. But the State Board of Education, the way this works is you've got, like I said, 15 members across different districts across the state. So depending on where you live, I think Edinburgh is the district that goes towards San Antonio. And then here in McAllen, or here in Mission where I live, that one goes through Brownsville, and it snakes its way up through Corpus all the way to Bay City, in Matagorda County, right before you get to Brazoria County. So I think I mentioned that before that I was interested in running for that, because since my ex-girlfriend lives in Lake Jackson, I know that area a little bit. I'm a little bit familiar with Bay City and Port Lavaca and all that stuff. I mean, I don't really know too much, but because I know the area a little bit, it wouldn't be too foreign to me. I could definitely try to figure out how it is, but I decided not to do that because it's way too much time. But yeah, so this board, of course, is responsible for overseeing K through 12 education in Texas, right? So if you want to become a teacher, or if you want, or maybe let's say you already are a teacher, and maybe you want to study to be a principal or a librarian. My brother's doing that right now. He's a middle school teacher. He's a middle school technology teacher, but he's studying at University of North Texas. It's an online program, but he's studying to become a librarian. So he would have to pass the test, and then he would need to get certified under the State Board of Education in order to become a librarian to be able to have that certification. So yeah, this is the board that certifies, you know, the professionals within Texas, whether it's teachers or counselors, principals, and librarians and other people that require those certifications. Even the teacher aides also require certifications, although that certification is very easy to get. Okay, anyway, so let's talk a little bit about the ex officio boards and commissions. Remember, these are the boards that are comprised of people that are already serving in other prestigious positions. So because of their position, that's why they can serve on these boards. So they're already there in Austin, so it makes sense that they would be able to serve on these extra boards. And they also have expertise in the subject at hand. So some of these boards are very specific in terms of having certain requirements to be able to serve on a board, right? So like an example would be like the board that oversees, like, you know, the TCO, right? The Texas Commission, you know, of law enforcement, you know, things like that, right? So you would have to have specialized people with tons of years of experience in law enforcement to serve on that board, because it makes sense, right? You don't want someone who isn't qualified when it comes to coming up with the standards for how, you know, police officers should be trained. You want to ensure that the people who are serving on those boards have tons of experience. You know, in a lot of cases, they also have education, so they're just very well rounded in their field, right? And so you want to make sure that you know, because it's very important, right? If you're going to be designing standards for if you're going to be designing standards that need to be adhered to, it makes sense that you would have that experience. Now, not all boards are like that. State Board of Education, you don't need education experience. I don't understand why that's not the case. With some of these other boards, you do, but just keep that in mind, that some of the boards do require experience, some of them don't. Just like for some of these elected positions, right? Like if, let's say, you wanted to be like you know, the county sheriff, right? There are requirements, right? You definitely do need to have law enforcement experience, right, in order to serve as, you know, as the sheriff, right? Because I guess because it's more specialized. Well, let's not get into that. Okay. Anyway, so appointed boards and commissions, right? So again, so the major categories, of course, they deal with health, welfare, rehabilitation, education. Of course, is a great example. Like I talked about, the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, basically being the top board that oversees colleges and universities in Texas, as well as general executive and administrative departments, such as some of these other boards also will deal with, like, you know, insurance boards, banking boards, and these, of course, are appointed by the governor. So you'll usually have, like, you know, let's say someone who has served in, maybe they've been on the Chamber of Commerce, and they have like 30 years experience running a bank or something like that. That would make them a key candidate, you know, to serve on one of these, like, banking, you know, and you know, or hospitality boards. That, you know, there's a bunch of these boards. Like, there are tons of them that Governor Abbott has access to, and he'll make appointments to all these different, you know, all kinds of different boards here. Now, really quickly, let's talk about the Public Utility Commission here, and we're going to talk about ERCOT a little bit. I think you all know that one, right? You know, and the book does talk about what happened in 2021. It is updated, so it is really cool to kind of read through it, right? Because we all lived it, right? So when we look at the Public Utility Commission, the PUC, this is responsible for overseeing, you know, the infrastructure of Texas when it comes to, you know, the public utilities, right? So when we look at, you know, like telephone poles and you know, the electrical grid and all that, the Public Utility Commission is responsible, you know, for overseeing that, also for promoting competition here, right? So they're also, of course, responsible for overseeing the telecommunications industry, right? And so, of course, we also talked about how the telecommunications industry is very, very large in Texas, right? We've got AT&T that is headquartered in Dallas, right? It used to be headquartered in San Antonio, but it used to be called SBC, and you know, Southwestern Bell also was the original name of that company. So they've you know, so they've moved up now to become AT&T, which is, you know, one of the top 4 telecommunication you know, companies in the country, right? So they're headquartered there in Dallas, hence the name AT&T Stadium for the Cowboys and AT&T Center for the Spurs. So anyway, so with that being said, they're responsible, like I said, for overseeing, you know, public utilities and telecommunications. And we also had the situation with ERCOT that happened right in February 2021, which ERCOT stands for the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, a nonprofit organization, which again was basically, they were in charge of overseeing the electricity usage in Texas, as well as also overseeing the infrastructure, right? So the Public Utility Commission basically passed that responsibility off to ERCOT, which are not government employees. They're a nonprofit organization that's appointed by the governor. And so instead, and so of course you all remember the controversy, right? That there were, you know, if you haven't studied this issue, it is really interesting because a lot of criticism came out during February 2021 because one of the issues was because of Texas not being connected to the national grid, right? And the argument that was made, or that's been made, is that the reason for this is because if Texas was connected to the national grid, and the national grid, of course, would allow for more of that sharing of power, across the country, right? So if Texas is needing more power, that would allow for the federal government to tap into um, other avenues of power from other parts of the country. The problem with that, though, in terms of why Texas didn't want to do that, was because that would also invite more federal regulation and more federal oversight into the Texas grid. So, of course, Texas being a less government state, they felt that that was too much government overreach, and so they decided to kind of have their own grid. But of course, that also comes with the responsibility, right? If you are going to move out of your, parents' house, then you're also going to be expected to pay the bills yourself, right? So that's why some people kind of got they were critical of it because Texas the winter storm was just too much for Texas to handle on their own, right? Now again, keep in mind some people have different opinions about this, but just note that that this definitely caused a lot of consternation when this happened, right? The case of the college governing board. So this is another one that we'll take a look at here. Also note that the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, we take a look at how that board is very specialized when it comes to what they do. So they're responsible for appointing presidents of universities. They're responsible for deciding to raise tuition. They're also responsible for providing tenure to faculty, which at college we don't have tenure. That'd be nice, even though there has been movements in Texas government to try to do away with tenure at the higher education level and things like that. But it's okay because I've heard some horror stories from some of my former professors. They talk about how difficult it is to get tenure and how stressful it is. So I mean, it's fine. I mean, I have enough stress already. So, and then the case of the Parks and Wildlife Commission. So this one is also important because this is, of course, is the commission that oversees the Texas state parks, right? I think some of y'all have gone to some of these state parks. I know I shared with you all that this past summer I probably went to what's usually regarded as the top state park in Texas, which is Palo Duro Canyon over in Amarillo, Texas, or a little bit to the southeast of Amarillo. It's near Canyon. Canyon is basically, you can see the Amarillo skyline from Canyon. It's basically like a suburb of Amarillo, but that's why it's named Canyon after Palo Duro Canyon. So very beautiful. I would definitely recommend for y'all to go check it out if you're ever in that. I know it's all the way on the other side of the state, and as I mentioned to y'all before, I wasn't going over there just for that. I was going to take a look at a travel trailer in Lubbock, but since I was already kind of out there in that part of the state, I was like, okay, why not? Let me go and check it out. And I'm so thankful that I did. But with that being said, the book talks about how that unfortunately, because state parks don't get a lot of funding, they're kind of looked at as kind of like an afterthought here. This creates a situation where the Parks and Wildlife Commission isn't able to. They have issues with being able to provide services for people who want to go to these parks. Right now, on the flip side, the state parks are very cheap to get in, right? I mean, I think I only paid $5 to get in, and I would have paid much more than that to go see that magnitude of a state park. And we have got some state parks down here as well here. And like the Benson State Park here, which I haven't gone in a while. I definitely want to go check that out, especially because I'm a bird watcher. I love. So as you can tell, I'm definitely a big parks and wildlife person. In the last couple of years since I started exercising and getting in better shape. But anyway, the point here is just that, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to take up your all's time. I'm sorry about that. The point of this is that there's just not enough funding here. But again, other responsibilities that they have is, again, overseeing the cleanliness of the park, also overseeing the type of like the type of fish that gets introduced to some of these lakes here. Now, also keep in mind that we also have the park rangers that oversee the regulation of the fishing standards. That's why you have to go get your fishing license, and when you get your fishing license, you also have to you have to read through what is the size of the fish that you can catch, right? So if you catch a small fish, you have to throw it back because it's not large enough. It needs more time to grow, right? So they try to engage in the sustainable fishing, right? So you only fish during certain seasons, during some parts of the year. Same thing like with hunting, right? That's why you only, like, I know, like for the birds, like the white-winged dove hunting season, that tends to happen in the fall because that's when correct me if I'm wrong on this, but from what I've read is that's when the mating season is over for the white-winged doves, because the white-winged doves, they mate in the spring and the summer. That's why they're still here, but you don't hear them. Like, they do their cooing sound. Again, I've learned this kind of like as I've become a bird enthusiast. They do their cooing sound during the spring and the summer because they're trying to attract mates and be able to have their broods. And then once all that's done, then they can go and hunt them because now they're no longer mating. So I just want to explain why the seasons and the rules for that, that's done, that's research based, right? It's not just done randomly. It's done to create sustainable environment. So okay, all right, sorry that we kind of went a little bit over. We went way too over here, so sorry about that. Let me stop the share here. Let me stop the record here. And I thank you all so much for stopping by here. Hold on, let me just get this going. Let me see. Hold on, let me stop the recording.